Hi guys, so one of my viewers asked me if I could discuss the topic of the autism spectrum in relation to INFJs. So I thought that was an interesting question to tackle. I don't think I've ever done it in video, so this is a first in 6 or 7 years of making video content, so that's kind of exciting in a way. But inevitably, at the very same time, I must also emphasize that I'm not a doctor. I am not an expert. That what I say is more my opinion, some insights I may have, but ought not to be taken literally. And I just want you guys to just exercise caution also when you handle what I say, because like I said, I am not a neuroscientist, I am not a neurological specialist, and I wouldn't want you to think that I am one, okay? So that being said, are there things that can be usefully shared from my reflections on INFJs and the autism spectrum? Well, the first thing that I would like to emphasize is that I don't think that there is a particular correlation between INFJ and the autism spectrum. I tend to think of type in terms of its existential structures, something that I talk about a lot in my first book, The Ecstatic Soul. Okay, my work is Jungian existentialism, at least that's what I like to call it. So I really talk about an existential mode of being for INFJs, outside of any necessarily neurological correlate. Right? That's not to say that there are no neurological correlates. We know that there are, but the question of how, like, INFJ types are organized neurologically, and how that overlaps possibly with a neurological mapping that is linked to, being on the autism spectrum. Well, that's clearly purely hypothetical at best, and more or less uncharted, unexplored territory. We can only make suppositions, we can only make conjectures. So I think that these days anyway, the autism spectrum is basically understood to be strongly correlated with certain neurodivergent developments, right? Neurodivergence, again, and being INFJ is something that I look at with skepticism. It seems to be very comforting for some people who identify as INFJ to say, like, I'm INFJ, so I must be neurodivergent. Neurodivergence versus neurotypical, that's a particular, way that your internal brain circuitry is organized. It's not a good or a bad thing, in the same way that being neurotypical is not a good or a bad thing, but there will be different adaptive strategies coming with those different, mental and neurological makeup. And I just can't really see how there would be a stronger correlation between neurodivergence and INFJ than between, neurodivergence and ISTP, for example, or INFP or ENFJ or whatever, Well, actually, neurodivergence ENFJ is kind of difficult to conceptualize, but it must exist. It really must exist, and it's maybe more common than we think. So there might be areas of overlap. I just think that kind of intellectual and research territory is currently not very well known, and it would be kind of irresponsible to project too much, because we might be talking a lot of nonsense. I think that most INFJs are neurotypical. Okay. I'm probably fairly neurotypical myself. I mean, again, maybe that's not the case, but I just think that if people start seeing neurodivergence in themselves or everywhere, it starts to kind of flatten the meaning of neurodivergence itself. What are you diverging from, if that's kind of just as common as neurotypicality? I think that, for example, like, INFJs in history mostly have shown signs of being relatively neurotypical. Of course, there are exceptions like Wittgenstein, almost certainly neurodivergence. You can see that in his writings. And I would say that it's quite likely that he was somewhere on the autism spectrum. But the fact that there's an autism spectrum and is conceptualized as such is really to emphasize not only that you can have more or less symptoms, or manifestations of autism, but also that there's, in terms of sort of not just quantity but quality related, there's such a wide variety of manifestations of autism that it's just hard to see how they map onto different subtypes of INFJ and things like that. The thing that I would say though is that if an INFJ happens to be on the autism spectrum, surely that will have an impact on the kind of subtype they orient themselves towards and tend to find security and safety within. And it's very tempting to think that solipsism will tend to be the first port of call and be hard to leave. Partly because, as far as I understand, people who are on the autism spectrum often have a spatio-temporal relationship to the world that is quite solipsistic in itself, and that can be really disorienting. They don't have the same internal clocks that we do have, not the same sort of spontaneously organizing space-time that we do have. And insofar as the NI world is different from external reality and has its own space-time in some weird sense, it's quite easy to imagine that that kind of NI world could be a very secure universe for the person who is on the autism spectrum. And so that would comfort them in the idea that solipsism is the most secure way for them to be. Reality itself being quite brutal and violent and aggressive to their senses, among other things. So yeah, I think that's kind of most of the thoughts that I could share at this point. It's too often that we hear people or see people make videos that say INFJs and the Sigma males, or because someone was recently asking me about Sigmas as well, or INFJs and neurodivergence. It's like, I think it's it's going too far, and it's a weird way of seeking to flatter the ego of INFJs, and particularly flatter the sense that is ultimately a pretty immature gratification that INFJs are really unique and can't be understood. There's a difference between saying, well, there's a uniqueness about INFJs and we need to understand it better to help people. There's a difference between that and saying, compared to other types, INFJs are so unique and so misunderstood, and they have such a special role to play that society doesn't acknowledge. Well, that can easily slide into pure egocentrism and narcissism, and we have to remain aware of that. And we live in an era where everywhere there are, narcissistic temptations being waved at us. Let's try to resist them as much as possible. Okay, so if you enjoyed that video, please give me a like. Don't forget, I've written 2 books on INFJs, the latest one being The Infinite Soul, INFJ Life in the Modern World. Yes, the modern world is often seen as hostile by INFJs and for INFJs. And yet, this book argues that it's possible to not make any concessions regarding your authentic INFJ experience and yet find meaning, value, and purpose in the world today. The Infinite Soul, this is a book to get. It came out a few months ago. It's fresh out of the oven. Check the link below for it. And its prequel, in case you haven't got it yet, is The Ecstatic Soul. Yes, you're not mistaken. Those 2 books are very much kin, okay? This book looks deeply into the INFJ mind, mental makeup, what's it like to be an INFJ, to have an INFJ kind of consciousness. If you want to know more about this, this is the most in-depth study of the topic you'll find online. And as usual, guys, don't forget that my Patreon page is the lifeblood of my channel. I very much rely on your kind donations to keep things going, so please consider joining my Patreon down below. You get access to bonus videos, in-depth discussions of mainstream YouTube content and content from my books. You get access to me, to the community. You can ask questions and many other beautiful things. So thank you guys and see you soon. Bye-bye.